For Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Israel's planning to strike Iran before the November 5th election, but will not target its nuclear or oil facilities. This according to reports by the Washington Post and Wall Street Journal, which say Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu informed the Biden administration of its plan. This comes as a team of American soldiers arrived in Israel Monday, deepening U.S. involvement in the Middle East conflict that continues to escalate. A statement from Pentagon Press Secretary Major General Pat Ryder said more troops in a THAAD battery missile system will continue to arrive in the coming days, but gave no timeline, he said, for security reasons. Hezbollah is calling for a ceasefire with Israel. Deputy Chief Naim Qassam made the statements today with a warning it's not a sign of weakness. Hezbollah began firing rockets attacks on Israel after Hamas's October 7th massacre in southern Israel. Israel has fired back, the two now trading cross-border strikes for more than a year, with Israeli troops now invading Lebanon. The United Nations says a quarter of Lebanon is under Israeli evacuation orders, impacting more than 1 million civilians. Rema Jamus Imsias is United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees Middle East Director.
Just yesterday, we had another 20 villages issued with an evacuation order in the south of the country. People are heeding these calls to evacuate, and they're fleeing with almost nothing. Many of them are being forced out into the open. They're sleeping under the skies as they try to find their way towards safety and support.
The UN says some 400,000 children have been displaced in 3 weeks of war, and more than 1 million children are out of school. More than 2,300 Lebanese have been killed in Israeli strikes, nearly 75% of them over the last month. In the last 3 weeks alone, UNICEF says more than 100 children were killed, over 800 wounded. The escalation has also put over 100 primary health care facilities out of service, while 12 hospitals are either no longer working or are only partially functional. The United Nations Human Rights Office is calling for an investigation into Israeli airstrike on an apartment building far from Hezbollah's stronghold in Lebanon that killed at least 22 people. Israel's also facing growing condemnation for its attacks on United Nations peacekeepers in southern Lebanon, known as UNIFIL. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's repeating the warning for them to temporarily leave the area where its military is operating against Hezbollah. The UN Security Council expressed strong concern Monday in a statement, and the European Union condemned the attacks and rejected Israeli allegations the UN is keeping them there to obstruct military operations against Hezbollah. More than 200 Jewish-led protesters were arrested at the New York Stock Exchange Monday after organizing a protest demanding the U.S. stop arming Israel. The group Jewish Voice for Peace said descendants of Holocaust survivors were among those carried away from the sit-in. Jewish Voice for Peace said in a statement, "Let's be clear once and for all, the U.S. is not arming Israel to protect Jews. The U.S. is arming Israel for its own profit and control of the region." Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed reports North Korea sent troops and weapons to help Russia win its war against Ukraine. He spoke publicly on the issue for the first time Monday, saying it's no longer just about transferring weapons. It's now about sending North Korean people to join the occupier's military forces.
Whoever helps Russia, we will respond as firmly as necessary to defend Ukraine.
He said this week he'll present his victory plan to end the war. NATO began its annual nuclear exercises Monday called Steadfast Noon, with more than 60 aircraft taking part in training flights over Western Europe, using 8 military bases and involving 2,000 personnel from 13 nations. The nuclear military drills come just days after the Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to a nuclear non-proliferation group made up of survivors of the U.S. atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte said nuclear deterrence is the cornerstone of allied security. Continued fallout over disinformation of the Biden administration's emergency response in the wake of Hurricanes Milton and Helene. Officials say federal disaster workers paused and changed some of their hurricane recovery efforts in North Carolina, including abandoning door-to-door visits after receiving threats they could be targeted by a militia. More from Farah Siddiqui.
United States Secretary of Homeland Security Alejandro Mayorkas warns about misinformation in the wake of Hurricane Helene.
We have individuals in need of assistance who are entitled to assistance who aren't seeking it because of the false information.
False claims include that FEMA will seize land from disaster-stricken communities, and a North Carolina man was just arrested for threatening FEMA workers. Former President Donald Trump is alleging that Vice President Kamala Harris is directing FEMA funds to illegal immigrants. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell calls that categorically false and says conspiracy theories won't stop them from doing their job.
It doesn't deter us. We know what our mission is.
I'm Farah Siddiqui for Pacifica Network and Public News Service.
I'm Christina Onestad reporting for Pacifica Radio.